Welcome to our previewing lecture on 1994's The Shawshank Redemption. I'm going to give a quick overview on the film itself, where it comes from in terms of writer-director, and actually the person who writes the score, Thomas Newman. And then I'm going to go into the elements of film form a little bit, leading up to the focus of this week's discussion, which is going to be cinematography, really thinking about how the camera tells the story of this strange prison drama. Okay, the film comes out in 1994, but in order to understand what it's doing exactly, we have to go back to the 1970s with a depressed, angry, alcoholic English teacher named Stephen King. I'm sure you know who he is. Stephen King started writing these horror novels in the 70s, and they have very sort of clearly demarcated topics, and you can sort of understand Stephen King's thinking. He looks at what's scary in the world and writes a novel on it. Carrie, his first novel, high school, scary, right? His second novel, Salem's Lot, vampires, small towns, scary. His third novel, The Shining, old hotels, being locked away with your family for a long period of time, being an alcoholic, scary. And then if you look at his stuff in the 80s, hey, cars are scary. Here's a scary novel about a car. Bathrooms are scary. He has a whole novel called Dreamcatcher about the terror of the bathroom, etc. Anyways, so Stephen King sort of writes these, horror novels. That's how he becomes famous. But in 1980, his fourth novel, Different Seasons, it's actually four novels together, and he was sort of sick of being labeled as a horror novelist, and he thought, well, let me write something that's, one, not supernatural, and two, not really seen as horror. Let me just write drama. And he writes four little novellas, 100 pages each, in a novel that he calls Different Seasons. Almost all of them turn into very popular films. One of them, Hope Springs Eternal, Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, becomes the film Shawshank Redemption. And it's a first-person narrative told from the point of view of an Irish guy named Red, played by Morgan Freeman in the film. So we go from Irish to African-American, sort of an interesting, cool jump. And the narrative is pretty much the same thing as what you're going to see in the film. A dude, Andy Dufresne, is sort of wrongfully imprisoned for the murder of his wife's lover, and he sort of has to search for some sort of existential problems and perhaps solutions inside of prison. We'll get to that stuff in a moment. Now we have to talk for a second about a guy named Frank Darabont. He's sort of the superstar of Stephen King adaptations. He puts Shawshank Redemption on screen. He takes Stephen King's The Green Mile, puts it on screen in a sort of brilliant way. He takes Stephen King's The Mist, a less popular novel and less popular film, in my mind, brilliant, gorgeous sort of movie, very brave ending, and puts that on screen, etc. And then you might know Frank Darabont. He's become most famous for The Walking Dead. He's the guy who decided, I'm going to take these comic books and make that TV show out of them. He's responsible for the first two seasons. I won't get into that here. If anyone wants to talk about The Walking Dead, what happened to it, what it started as, and how it got to be the steaming pile of crap it's become, feel free to contact me or throw me an email. Or if you want to fight that statement, go for it. Okay, but Frank Darabont, what makes him sort of interesting is he seems to have the sensibility. He loves old school horror movies, but he also loves old Hollywood. And you're going to see in The Shawshank Redemption a kind of it's a small movie. I mean, we're basically in one building the whole time, but it has sort of a big feel. The characters are larger than life. And I think what's going on in the film, it's not just about a prison movie. It's not just about a bunch of guys in jail. It's really a sort of a metaphoric movie. It's an allegory, which is sort of an overblown metaphorical story where each character represents one specific thing in our lives. And a place can represent an emotional situation, etc. And I'm going to argue that The Shawshank Redemption is really what we would call sort of an existential narrative. The prison is, I know it sounds corny to talk about it, but it's the prison of our lives, the prisons of our expectations, the prisons of our culture, the frames that we live inside of our whole lives that become really hard to sort of find meaning into, to find reasons for doing things, basically. So if we think about the movie as sort of a myth, as an existential myth, everything comes into shape. You're going to realize in the film that everything's sort of over the top. The warden isn't just evil, he's sort of satanic evil, and the prison guards aren't just violent, horrible people, they are demonic. And I think that the reason for that is that Frank Darabont's setting this up not as an accurate filming of a prison life. it ends up being more metaphor so that it's one person's goal, one person's journey in life. And because of that, each character becomes a little heightened, a little hyperbolic. I'm sure if you talk to anybody in your life, right, they have the villains, they have the heroes, and the way they talk about their experience. And if you actually meet those people, they're probably not as villainous as your friend makes them out to be. And I'm babbling a little bit. Hopefully I'm making sense about how the film is meant to be one person's colored vision, an unrealistic vision, maybe 30% amped up, exaggerated, of what life feels like. And I think that's maybe one of the reasons it's become the most popular movie of all time, in America at least, because people really seem to put themselves into it, and they sort of see that it's a metaphor for some of their own struggles. So that's one way to sort of think about the movie. Now let's walk through some of the elements of film form. In terms of literary design, you're going to see a lot of big metaphors to think about. The film, at Mount Sam Dumb, it's about walls. It's about not just being in prison walls, but how walls keep us entrenched in our own lives, how they keep out things that we might not should keep out, maybe things that we should let in. We're going to think about big, again, mythological images, birds. We talk a lot about birds in the film, and we actually see some birds in the films. Trees. Again, I mean, it sounds stupid to talk about trees. Sorry, I'm sort of looking outside my window. But, they sort of root deeply into the ground. They grow towards the sky. They allow us to think about sort of the imaginative, the exploratory, the freedom of the sky, with also the depth and the richness of being grounded in the earth. So these mythological images, the ocean, this wildly beautiful, seemingly endless image of maybe spirit. A boat becomes a very important symbol in the text, the film, something that might traverse that wild spirit of the ocean. There's more, but I just want to link those out for us. In terms of sound design, pay attention to the score. Thomas Newman, he's the same guy that scores American Beauty from last week. A really weird, haunting score. I'm not going to get into music theory here, but he uses lots of chords and chord progressions and melodies that don't take place in the same scale. Okay, so for the musicians out there, he's borrowing notes that have no business being in that scale. Later in the film, Red, or Andy, one of our main characters, is going to say something like, there's a piece of volcanic glass that has no business being in a hayfield. Like that piece of volcanic glass in that hayfield, a lot of the notes in the chords we're going to hear and the scales we're going to hear have no business being there. They still sound beautiful, but they're haunting and strange and a little uncanny, and we know that something subtly off or maybe even supernatural is happening. We're also going to get some Mozart, going to some classical music, and then maybe some country music, some Hank Williams. When you watch the film, you'll see how those become pretty cool and pretty important. Editing is very interesting in the film. You're going to see the same sequences played out in different periods of time. Because it's a prison film, and we're going to watch folks being in prison for 30 years, meals are going to happen over and over again. Sometimes people might try to get, you're going to see one of the main characters has these parole hearings, and we're going to see multiple parole hearings. We're going to see certain types of violence played out over and over again in very similar ways. So the film is going to edit these sequences together so that they look similar, but maybe there's a different voiceover, or maybe they're lighted differently, or maybe something different happens this time in these sort of rhythms. So look at the editing and how those types of stories inside of the film are put together. Okay, lastly, cinematography. Hopefully you'll look at, not hopefully, you will look at, if I could threaten you, I would be, the cinematography document where I'm looking at just some basic terminology. I want you to use it in your use it in your essay and use it in your discussion. So frame, very simple, right? It's literally what is inside the frame of the film. Shot, we talked about that a little bit before. It's sort of every time the camera is on and then off, the length of one moment before it cuts to another shot. Camera angle, you're going to see some gorgeous camera angles throughout the film. I'll point some out in a second. And then the types of movement that the camera might go through. So some other words you might think about: tracking, or a tracking shot. This is literally when the camera is either tracking an object or it's literally on a track. So the camera is going to sort of push forward in a very specific way. You're going to watch people go into prison, and there's this beautiful tracking shot where the camera sort of points up while it's going forward on a track. And it's going to sort of show you, here's the doorway, here's the entrance to the prison, there's the sky. Oh shit, we are now in prison. The camera walks in. Sorry for the swear word there. I'm actually surprised I don't drop a couple more on these lectures. I tend to swear a lot in class, sorry. But anyways, you're going to watch a lot of pushes, cameras that walk into rooms almost as if we are, as an audience, walking into the prison, or walking into a parole hearing, or walking into a cell. So look for those tracking shots and those push shots. Also look for aerial shots, specifically crane shots. There's one shot, I don't want to ruin it, in the middle of the film. You'll know what I'm talking about. It's amazing. It is one of the most beautiful moments of cinema in American history, I think, where the camera is very high up, looking down into sort of the courtyard of the prison while some Mozart is being played. And it's just an extraordinary moment. We're also in a couple establishing shots of, here's the prison, or here's a roof. There's a cool roof scene in the movie, etc. So please, more than anything else, watch out for the camera, and watch out for how the camera works with other elements of film form. Example, that crane shot I just mentioned. Sorry, this apparently is crane. The crane shot I just mentioned. We're going to be hearing diegetic sound. So this is sound that comes from the movie itself, and it's going to be this Mozart that's being played. So typically that would be something that's non-diegetic. If you're hearing, it's a part of The Marriage of Figaro. It's a Mozart opera. To hear that, you would think that would be part of the score and the characters don't hear it, but we do. No, here the characters hear it, and we're watching the characters through these crane shots listen to this diegetic sound, and hopefully you'll be able to sort of think about why that's important, what ideas that might be expressing to us, etc. Okay, that's it for this pre-lecture. Please enjoy the Shawshank Redemption. Take a lot of notes on cameras, and it's okay while you're taking notes if you don't get the terminology perfect. I'm much more concerned that you're paying attention to how the camera works than getting the vocabulary perfect. I can respond to your lecture, respond to your essays, and tighten that stuff up. So please, let your imaginations go with the film, see what you think it means, see how you think it works, and have fun sort of exploring both Frank Darabont / Stephen King's The Shawshank Redemption.